Hello and welcome to the Holistic Interview Series. My name is Morgan and I'm the owner of Holistic Hounds. I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio, and I currently reside in the Pacific Northwest. Today we had planned an interview, but our guest who was supposed to interview me had to reschedule. So for today, I'm just going to answer some questions about my business, about Holistic Hounds, and why I got started. So you guys can get the opportunity to learn a little bit more about me and about what I do and why I do it. And so I will start off by talking about how I began my journey working with animals. So I've always loved animals, and from a young age, I helped to care for and handle a variety of different companion animals, including exotics. So when I was just 2 years old, I had a pet snake, and my pet snake was my best friend, and I would walk around with him around my neck with parental supervision, of course. And we had cats, and we had dogs, and we had ducks. We even had a tarantula. At one point, we had rats. We had an iguana. So I grew up with that affinity for animals of all kinds. But I really, really always loved dogs. And in childhood, I always had cats. And, we always had at least three cats. Sometimes, I mean, at one point, I want to say we had like five cats. So I always begged my mom for a dog because I just always loved dogs. But she said that they were too much work and that having a dog was too much. So I didn't get my first dog that we ended up keeping until I was about 16. So I always knew that I wanted to work with animals and I always knew that I loved dogs. So then in 2017, I got my first job um, working with animals professionally, and that was at a conventional high volume grooming salon. And so I was hired in as a dog bather and a grooming assistant. From the beginning, I worked really well with the dogs, and that was evident upon um, my fellow coworkers, and also with the manager. So I was quickly promoted. I worked really well with the dogs who were extra anxious, the large breed dogs, and the old dogs. So I did have a natural ability to do dog grooming, but the reason why I was really so good at the job was because of my ability to work with animals who are anxious and scared. And so that was my first job, was working at a conventional grooming salon. I worked there for about 2 months and I learned a lot, but I immediately saw some red flags as far as the quality of care that was being given to the animals. Um, I didn't like that the dogs were treated as a product and that we were supposed to get the job done regardless of how the animal was responding. So I ended up leaving the grooming salon, and then I went on to work in dog daycares, boarding facilities, and rescues. And so the next job that I had after the grooming salon was the dog daycare. And I quickly excelled at that job as well. So on my first day, I so my job, I was responsible for managing large groups of dogs, and that was what I started out doing. So my first day, um, I was given a group of over 20 dogs, and I was responsible for managing them by myself. And mind you, I didn't have a lot of experience working with dogs, and I didn't have a lot of experience working with so many dogs at one time. But I quickly learned and I quickly excelled at the job, and I became a kennel manager. So I was responsible for the daycare side of things and the boarding side of things, because the place that I worked was a dog daycare and a boarding facility. So we would have our daycare dogs and then we'd have the boarding dogs. As the manager, I was responsible for some of my shifts. I was managing the dog groups because I got really, really good at that. And the days went a lot smoother, usually when I was managing the dogs. Um, and I would do things like inputting vet records, checking dogs in for daycare and boarding, getting their kennels ready, administering medications. So all those sorts of things. And this was I would say, a pretty busy kennel. So around the holidays, especially, we were fully booked, and fully booked meant about 100 dogs in our care. And so I was kind of just thrown right into it from the beginning. And I worked as the manager at that kennel for a little over a year. And I absolutely loved it. I loved the dogs. I loved the job, but it became extremely stressful. And I started to notice that some things just weren't right. Um, I became really close with the lady that I worked for, and um, eventually I started to see some of the things that were placing profit above the care of the animals. So just a couple quick examples because it is a part of why I am doing what I do today. So I started noticing like things like the dogs becoming ill. And then the owner didn't want to be honest about that, or dogs getting in fights and us not telling the owners. Fights were a regular thing between the dog groups. The dog groups were so large and it was only one person monitoring them. So the kind of the last straw for me was not only my boss lying to the customers about the health of their dogs and the activities that were taking place while they were at her facility, but a dog died in the kennel. And this was because she was attacked by another dog in playgroup and her ear was torn off. I was the one that was called to help when that happened because I was the manager in charge. And the dog collapsed on the ground and her ear was essentially torn off. And the first thing I said was, "This dog needs veterinary attention." Um, and I'm not sure why, but nobody listened to that. The owner of the dog was called, and I believe that my boss downplayed the injury, made it seem like it wasn't as bad as it was because she was afraid, and the dog didn't go to the vet. So I did everything I could to help this dog. And the next morning, I showed up for work and my boss wasn't there, which was weird because she lived on property and she was usually the first one to open the door and everything. But for this day, she didn't. And so I was the one that went in to go check on the dog, and she had passed away and she was dead in her kennel. And I thought that was a little bit ridiculous because honestly, I think the dog would have lived if she would have received veterinary care. She didn't, and she passed away, and I was the one who found her dead body. And she was a large breed dog, so she was over 100-pound Great Dane, and it took three of us to carry her body out of the kennel. And this was such a traumatic experience for me because I loved every single dog that came in there. I knew every single dog by name, and to me, this was something that should not have happened. Um, And this is when I started to do more research as well on the holistic end of things. And so after I left that job, I did go on to work in other dog daycares. And unfortunately, I realized that the other ones weren't much better. I did work at a dog daycare that was owned by a veterinarian, and I thought that that would have been a better opportunity to have a safer, because I knew basically if the dog's ear got torn off, they at least wouldn't die because the vet would take care of it. But I also realized there was a lot of corruption involved with that as well. And so I worked in some rescues. I worked in multiple different dog daycares, pretty much the majority of the ones that were in the area around me. I got tons of experience working with the dogs and I got to know them on a more intricate level. But the way that the places were being managed, I couldn't tolerate. The other dog daycare I worked at, people were actively hitting the dogs and punishing them when they would misbehave. And this was not something that I was comfortable with. This is not something I had ever seen. And so these were all just red flags to me that the animal care industry needed to evolve and that these animals were not being treated the way that they deserved. So once I, gained the confidence to stop working for someone else, I became self-employed in 2020, where I was a private pet sitter. And so I was a private pet sitter for about 2 years before I officially opened my business, Holistic Hounds, which was founded in 2021. And so I just realized that we needed to offer animals a higher quality of care. Not only did we need to be transparent about what was going on with the animal, but I also noticed all the health problems that a lot of the dogs in the kennels had. And I started figuring out why the dogs were having all these health issues. So to sum it all up, I worked in the animal care industry for quite a few years. So, for about 4 years before I opened my own business. And in these 4 years, I learned so much about dogs. I gained a greater love for them. But I guess in a sense, I became resentful towards the people that were managing these facilities because, in my professional opinion, there was a lot that was going on that it wasn't dog centered. It wasn't about the animals. It was about making a profit, and it was about making sure your reputation was maintained. And so I was like, you know what? I want to start my own business, and I want to kind of do things my way. I didn't like to be put in situations where, people are hitting dogs in front of me, or grabbing them harshly by their collars and things like that. And so I did get a lot of grooming experience at the dog daycares, kennels, rescues, etc. And it was really just the bathing, drying, and nail trimming to start off with. But my experience in the grooming salon to start out with, it did set me up for success in all of my grooming that I did. And I always kind of offered a more holistic approach where I wouldn't force dogs through something if they were extremely uncomfortable. So I guess the next question would be, what does holistic mean to me? And I'll kind of tie this in with, do I think most people know what the word holistic means? So to me, holistic means the interconnectedness of all things. And so it means taking a mind, body, and soul approach. And so that doesn't just mean compassionate handling and force free and positive reinforcement methods, but it means looking at all dimensions of the animal and of yourself and of nature. And so since we're all interconnected, we're all connected with one another, and that really means that what I do affects others and what others do affect me and that sort of thing. So I believe that holistic really means evolution and returning to our roots, because for so long we've lived such a unnatural life, and we need to return to our roots. A lot of the stuff that is making us ill, is because we're not in tune with nature. And so, for example, to me, holistic means having a general knowledge of the innate intelligence of the body to heal itself. So, being aware of subtle energy and how that impacts health. Along with that, holistic to me means being mindful of the fact that allopathic medicine has drawbacks and side effects, and that there are other things that we can do to create health besides drugs and surgery. And so, one of the major things that I think that sets me apart from my peers when it comes to holistic is that I've kind of gone down the rabbit hole and I've learned a lot more about holistic veterinary medicine. So, holistic vet care and why that's important, and why conventional veterinarians might not be the best option for treatment for our animals. And again, it's not their fault. It's just the way that the system is designed and the way that the curriculum is and how everything's kind of profit oriented. So, and I'll just give this as an example before we move on. But one of the big things with offering holistic care is being mindful of the side effects of conventional treatments. And so that we're talking like typical flea, tick, and heartworm medications for cats and dogs, being mindful of the toxicity involved with that, being mindful of the fact that these medications long term can cause cancer, and that's proven, and it's proven with studies and science. And it's kind of being aware that just because your veterinarian tells you that your dog needs a vaccine every single year, or needs, the DHL vaccine, does not mean that it's true, and does not mean that it's healthy for your animal. And again, this isn't the fault of the practitioners, but it's really the curriculum that's in place that's kind of leaving a lot of veterinarians in the dark. So when I'm talking about holistic veterinarians, I'm talking about veterinarians that went to regular veterinary school and then they went on to learn more beyond that. So when I'm talking about holistic medicine, I'm talking about homeopathy, I'm talking about herbalism, I'm talking about all the so called alternative medicines that are really the original medicines. So, pharmaceutical drugs have side effects, and I'm not going to go super into it because this interview would end up being very long. But I will say that we've all kind of been duped by allopathic medicine in the Western culture. And it is a time to return to our roots. Because, when a lot of the medications and the vaccines that allopathic doctors are prescribing are not only not solving the health issue, but they can actually make things worse. And so we just got to be very mindful about the practitioners we're taking our animals to. A holistic and homeopathic veterinarian is better suited to be able to help your animal um, than just a traditional vet may be able to. And so the traditional vets can be a great place for emergencies, for trauma, but for more chronic conditions, it is advisable to seek out a seasoned holistic veterinarian. And so I believe that part of being holistic means knowing about holistic veterinary care and why it's important, knowing about why yearly vaccines and why certain vaccines are not good for our animals, knowing about the corruption in the pet food industry, and all these sorts of things to me kind of gives a mind, body, soul approach. We ignore the soul, we ignore the spiritual element of our animal and our own health. And all that does is create havoc in our lives. It creates physical disease. And I don't think that most people know what holistic means. I don't. I believe it's become such a buzzword that it essentially has lost its meaning. And that is a little bit upsetting, but at the same time, it is awesome that more people are looking into alternative medicine and natural ways to heal the body. Um, my belief is that we all have an innate ability to heal within us, and that it's more in our power and our control to initiate that healing than we give ourselves credit for. So, no, I don't think most people know what the word holistic means. And I think that there's a lot of people that are using the word holistic in their business title, for example, even holistic veterinarians, that may not actually be encompassing what holistic is. But holistic to me also means respecting that other people have a different idea of how to live their lives. They have a different preference. And I don't expect everyone to agree with everything that I believe holistic is. But to me, holistic is a lifestyle. Um, and it's ever evolving and changing. So I kind of already talked about why I decided to offer holistic services rather than traditional, but also part of that was having quite a few negative experiences in the human healthcare field. And so I will preface this with I grew up with a conventional nurse as my mother, and my grandmother was also a conventional nurse. So I had no reason to not believe in modern medicine. In fact, I believed in it heavily. And when I was sick, I took pills. Um, but I was very ill as a child. I had scarlet fever twice. And I mean, having scarlet fever twice as a kid, um, that wasn't normal. My other peers were not getting scarlet fever. And so I was highly sensitive to the conventional treatments I was being given. And this kind of affected my entire life from the time that I was an infant up until today. So when I was a teenager, I was having some issues with depression and anxiety and substance abuse, and I was admitted to the hospital. And unfortunately, um, I was treated without informed consent. I was given drugs against my will. I had no choice in my treatment plan. I was not allowed to say no to the drugs. And I was basically told that I would never function in society normally because I was mentally ill and my brain chemistry was imbalanced. Um, and as I've learned more and more, I've recognized that the pharmaceutical drugs that are given for mental health problems have a lot of side effects. The drugs that they gave me for my mental health never helped. They made everything worse. Not only that, I was over 200 pounds when I was on the pharmaceutical drugs that they gave me that were supposed to help me heal. They never did. In fact, I was on, and I don't want to name the drugs, but they are drugs that are given to dogs for a sedative. And honestly, I would never recommend giving those drugs to dogs or anybody because, you know, I could barely think. I could barely talk. And that's the intention behind the drugs. I mean, they're shut me up drugs. They're not supposed to help you heal. They're supposed to shut you up. And that's what they did. They shut down my brain. It was very hard for me to think. I'm still healing from the side effects from all those drugs. I realized that holistic healing was the only way to real healing. Drugs and pharmaceuticals, they're a mask, and they may be necessary short term, but for long term, that you're not going to heal from that. And a lot of this that I'm talking about is super controversial, but this is my experience. My experience is that people and dogs that have mental health problems, the pharmaceutical drugs are most likely not going to have the effect that you want them to have. Um, and so I realized that it wasn't just, I had my horrible traumatic experience in the hospital where I was abused by staff members. And I was conscious enough to know what was going on, but I wasn't conscious enough to do anything about it. Um, and I'm going to be speaking on this later on. It's a very controversial topic, but it is something that needs discussed. People, and again, I was 18 years old at the time. I was 18 years old. They wouldn't let my mom see me. They were giving me drugs that I was having side effects on, such as memory loss, all of these things. And in my opinion, I shouldn't have been given these drugs. I should have been allowed to sober up, and I should have been given a treatment in my option in my own treatment. But kind of once you're admitted to a hospital or um, health center, you're pretty much signing away your rights, and you're pretty much a guinea pig. And I was 18 years old, and that traumatized me for life. So I really, really believe that empowering ourselves to um, have different ways of creating health. So, for example, meditation, yoga, essential oils, better diet, some EFT, emotional freedom technique. There are so many different therapies and modalities that can be helpful. I came across Reiki, so Reiki healing. And I'm going to kind of just, talk off the cuff here instead of going through the questions. But so Reiki healing. My first experience with Reiki was extremely profound. And I then became certified in animal Reiki and human Reiki. Um, and it's changed my life so much. And not only that, I changed my diet. I stopped eating the foods that I was eating, and that was having a big effect on my mental health. And so basically, I realized that the healing ability was within us and it wasn't outside of us. And as much as we all if we get in a car accident, then yes, we need to go to the hospital. And I'm not saying that modern medicine isn't a good thing, because it absolutely is, and it could be life saving. But what I'm saying is the pharmaceutical companies, they're designed for profit. They're not designed to create lasting health. And so energy healing has been what's really allowed me to recognize my own ability to heal. And I realized that the way that I was treated physically, but also medically for my mental health problem, it just made everything worse. It made it harder for me to heal. Um, it palliated, it suppressed, and all these years later, and I'm still trying to heal from my experiences in the hospital, of the things that were done to me when I was half conscious by people that are medical professionals, but they're not trustworthy, and they intend on harming the patients. And I know all of this is controversial, but it's getting to be where we need to speak up on it, and we need to do something about it instead of just kind of turning a blind eye and acting like this stuff isn't occurring. So let's see. What is the most common sensitivity that I see with the animals I work with? And so, what I would say, the most common sensitivity I see with animals that I work with would be just generalized anxiety. So, generalized anxiety. And I would say for the majority of animals, they feel like they don't have a voice. They feel like they're not being heard. They feel like they don't have choices. And my experience in the hospital, being basically given drugs against my will, drugs that had some serious side effects, I can really relate to how the animals feel, especially our companion cats and dogs. we don't give them a lot of choices. And a lot of times they're trying to speak up to us and we're not listening and we're not hearing them. And so this can cause disease, it can cause chronic health conditions. So, yeah, the most common sensitivity I see is generalized anxiety and an overall feeling of not being heard or not feeling safe. And so, and that's why I offer energy healing and that's why I offer trauma informed care because I think it's extremely important to offer a level of actual spiritual healing to our animals to say, I'm listening to you. I hear you and you're safe with me. And that makes a big difference. So, do I recognize the importance of keeping my own energy grounded and balanced when working with animals? Yes, I absolutely do. This is extremely important to me. And because I work with traumatized and sensitive and anxious animals, um, and animals feed off of our energy. And so, it's crucial for someone that works with animals to be grounded and centered and balanced. And so, for example, if I'm having a really rough day, and I'm having some, emotional distress, then I will either reschedule the appointment if I'm able to, or I'll at the very least make sure I do some grounding work beforehand. So, meditation, yoga, breath work, cleansing energy. But yeah, I think the most important thing is to know your limits and to know your own energy. So if you're going to work with a traumatized and anxious dog, but you're feeling anxious yourself, then either reschedule and pick a day where you're feeling more grounded and balanced, or do some grounding and healing work on yourself before you work with that animal. Because yeah, it's really really important to manage our own energy with the animals that we care for. Okay. So the next question is, are you attuned to Reiki healing? And I already answered that. Yes. So I became trained in Columbus, Ohio at the Reiki Center. And I took, when I first took Reiki, it was a class for humans. So it was like human Reiki that I learned. And it was also animal Reiki. And so because they are a little bit different, um, yes. And how does this benefit my business? Reiki is the cornerstone of everything that I do at Holistic Hounds. Um, I start working with the animals at a distance through energy before I ever meet them in person. And for animals that are anxious and scared, this is extremely beneficial. I would say that every pet professional needs to learn at least the basics of animal Reiki. Why I think it's so important is because a lot of us are missing the subtle energy component to what we're doing, and we're focusing on relying on physical observations, and physical observations are absolutely important, but having the ability to read energy is really important as well. And so I truly believe that every single animal care professional needs to be trained in Reiki healing, and not only for the animals in our care, but for ourselves as well. So, for those of us that work with animals, we're usually pretty sensitive people and we're usually empathetic as well. And so, this can lead to burnout, this can lead to compassion fatigue, and all these other things. So, I think it's extremely important to have a modality of healing. And even if it's just breath work or meditation, it doesn't have to be Reiki healing, but something that allows us to be more on an intuitive level. And so I think Reiki honestly benefits my business more than anything else that I do and offer because it allows me to connect with these animals on a higher level and it becomes a healing experience. It becomes a healing experience instead of just grooming a dog or you know what I mean. It's kind of expanding us into a higher reality. It's allowing us to be the spiritual beings we came here to be and to offer ourselves healing and to remind the animals in our care that they also have the ability to heal themselves and that they have a voice. So, can I share a story of a time I helped calm an anxious animal? And so this is the story that is really good one to tell. So when I was in my grooming training class, um it was time for us to start to do some physical grooming with the dogs. And I had a golden doodle that came in that was selected as my dog to groom. And he was nervous and he was scared. And the first thing he did when he saw me, he was kind of lowered his head and he gave out a little growl. And so before I even tried to handle him, I asked my instructor, I said, "Is it okay if I, offer this dog some Reiki?" And she was a little sketched out, but she was like, "Yeah, sure, just let me watch." And so the dog was on the floor, he was on a leash, and I just sat there with him and I just breathed, I calmed and I centered myself. And within literally 2 minutes, the dog was like, "Oh, okay, you're safe." And by the end of the grooming session, he was being cuddly towards me, and my grooming instructor was like, "Wow, that's awesome. That works really quickly." So obviously, this doesn't always happen, but in this situation, it did, and it happened almost instantly. Where I just changed my energy, I sent out a positive intention for healing, and the dog responded. And so there's a lot of other stories that I could tell about times that I worked at the grooming, or not the grooming salon, but mainly the dog daycares and boarding kennels, because a lot of the dogs were stressed, a lot of them were anxious. And so a lot of my time was spent working with those animals, trying to help them feel more comfortable. And in what I do now, I wouldn't say that I calm anxious animals um, as much, because I allow them to express their anxiety, and I give them space, and I will offer them Reiki healing. But so I did a lot more of like calming an anxious animal when I worked at the places that were super stressful. But now I don't really try to, like, I wouldn't try to make an animal feel calm and safe if they didn't feel calm and safe. Because a lot of what I noticed, even myself doing after I worked in the more of a, like, conventional setting for a long time, it was always the dogs would cry, or something would happen, and it would be your automatic reaction to say, "You're fine," or "You're okay." And it was just something we did because, whatever. But now, all these years later, now that I work the way that I do, I would never tell an animal they're okay when they're not. And again, that's us. And I realized it was the humans trying to calm themselves. Because when the dogs are anxious and upset, it makes us anxious and upset. And when it's, for example, in the dog daycare, if the dog was in a kennel for, let's say 4 hours, and they're crying the whole time, it can be really stressful. Because in that situation, you can't really let them out, because if I'm in a group of dogs with the dogs that are all out, and then there's a dog that's in the kennel that's crying, the dog's pretty much just left there to cry on its own. And that's not something that I would ever be okay with now. But so yeah, I guess I don't really calm animals as much as offering them a sacred space for healing, and a space where they have a voice and a choice. And I think that alone will calm almost any animal pretty quickly. So what is my favorite part of my job? And so obviously it's the healing work that happens, but it's the connections that I make with pets and people. Because what I do is so niche, and it's a specialty service. Because I work at rehabilitating anxious dogs through grooming. I do energy healing for traumatized dogs, and I do animal communication, as well as formulating energy wellness plans, and a lot of other type of holistic healing, where I can connect animal carers with a qualified and seasoned holistic veterinarian, not someone just claiming to be holistic. And so all these sorts of things um, are my favorite part of my job. I absolutely love the connections that I create with these animals, and I love the communication between me and the animals, and then the animals and their caretakers, because I've recognized that I'm offering such a different service than your average groomer. I'm offering a healing experience to pets and people. And so that's not for everyone, because not everybody wants the light shined on all their darkness, essentially, so to speak. So I am very different than your average pet care professional. If someone comes to me, they're getting a healing experience. They're not getting a pamper for their dog. They're getting a whole healing experience, because I'm Reiki attuned, because I'm in tune with energy, because I'm aware of the drawbacks of allopathic medicine. These animals are getting the chance to be themselves pretty much for the first time in a lot of situations. And then it's allowing the person that they share a home with to really see the intelligence of their animal. And sometimes for certain people, this can be a little uncomfortable. So the level of healing can be uncomfortable, but I wouldn't trade it for the world. I know that any dog or person that comes to me, their life is going to be changed forever, even if we only do a meet and treat and they decide to go with another professional because they're not looking for a healing experience. I believe that everything is energy, and I believe that my clients, dogs and people, whatever animal they may be, I also work with cats and wild animals as well, doing Reiki healing and animal communication. So I really believe that there's a soul contract involved with all of the animals and people that I connect with, and I really do feel like it's a spiritual truth. So my idea is evolving the industry. My idea is changing this task-oriented work to one of a healing experience. And so I absolutely love what I do. It sucks sometimes, and that goes on to the next question. What has been my biggest challenge as a pet care professional? And I suppose that would be offering something so different than what everyone else offers. Um, it can be challenging because people misunderstand what you really do, and you get a lot of judgment from the conventional view of pet care. Even for some people, when you say, I offer animals consent or I work on consent based, handling and that sort of thing. Some people just think it's funny and they can't imagine an animal actually giving consent. And so I think the biggest challenge is also finding support from other like-minded professionals. Um, like I said, I kind of went down the rabbit hole with my learning experience. I've purchased all the holistic veterinary books that I can, and I've read through them multiple times. So, like Dr. Richard Pitcairn's Natural Health for Dogs and Cats is one of my favorite books. And once you learn all this stuff, you can't really go back. And then, you can't really go back to feed and kibble after, your cat developed urinary crystals because of that diet. And then when other people feed, their animals kibble, you definitely don't want to judge them, but you do want to equip them with knowledge. And sometimes I found in my experience that people don't want the information. They don't. They want to just keep living the way that they're living. And I respect that. Not everybody is capable of handling, oh my God, I've been doing everything wrong my whole life. Because it brings up a lot of feelings of guilt and self-consciousness, really. So I truly believe that this is all going to change. I really believe that people are going to be wanting this information more instead of running from it. And yeah, so my biggest challenge, I would say, is finding the right support. I've have had other holistic pet care professionals block me, talk down to me, and that's really because my education is more vast than what they currently know or have access to. And when a lot of the conventional vets are pushing misinformation, it's really easy for people to just believe it. So anything that goes against what they already know, you don't want to hear it. So that's been a challenge. Um, and what is the most important thing for pet parents to know? I would say one of the most important things for pet parents to know is that your animal's always communicating with you. They're always talking to you, and they do have the ability to talk to you telepathically. And they want you, the first thing they want is for you to forgive yourself. And I would say the second thing that they probably want is for us to put our phones down, for us to turn the TV off, and really just be with them. And I think it's extremely important for pet parents to know the drawbacks of allopathic medicine, including flea, tick, and heartworm medications, vaccines, pharmaceutical drugs, and the like of those. It's extremely important for pet parents to be knowledgeable about nutrition and healthy pet food. And all of this is all the information is there for you to find. And if you can't, there are a lot of professionals that are willing to help as well. So yeah, just pet parents need to know that their animals are always communicating with them and trying to tell them things, and it's up to us to listen, but also to be mindful about allopathic medicine and what the side effects and drawbacks of that are, because we're seeing cancers more and more in dogs and people and cats and companion animals, and it's directly related to environmental factors, diet, nutrition, vaccines, medications, breeding, all of these things. So just to kind of be a little bit more educated about the holistic side of things. And I guess the last question would be, if I could be any animal, what would I be and why? And so, I've been thinking about this a lot. And for today, I wanted to say that if I could choose any animal to be, it would be a raven. I've come to love ravens a lot more now that I live in the Pacific Northwest because they're just more prevalent out here. And I always used to confuse crows and ravens, and you can usually tell the difference because ravens are a little bit bigger on average, and the sound that they make is different. So why would I choose to be a raven? Because they're so intelligent and because they're protectors of energy. And a lot of people, when they see a raven, they might think death or something negative. Um, but when I see a raven, I see protection and I see great spirit and I see healing, and I absolutely love ravens and crows. They're black in color, and so sometimes people are a little bit more put off by those birds, but they're so intelligent and they're such protectors of the land and of energy. So, yeah, I would choose to be a raven, I guess. So, thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Morgan Fitzgerald. I'm the owner of Holistic Hounds. If you'd like to learn more about me, you can visit my website at www.holistichounds.dog, and that's holistic with a W. And I also just published a book on animal communication, and it's called Telepathic Tales, A Tale of Higher Communication by Morgan Fitzgerald. And you can find that on Amazon. You could find that on Barnes and Noble and Smashwords. And you can also visit our website for that, which is www.telepathictales.com. So thank you guys so much for tuning in and getting the chance to learn a little bit more about me. And we'll see you at the next interview.